There's, broadly speaking, two different ways to go about designing a tabletop RPG. You've got a top-down approach and bottom-up approach. In this analogy, the top is the flavor, the appearance, the first impressions when someone looks at the system. And at the bottom, you have all the mechanics that support the fantasy or the experience that you are trying to achieve. So a top-down approach starts with the flavor, starts with the, I don't want to say checklist, because here's the thing. 5th edition is a top-down approach. You have, like, the designers say, okay, we need humans, dwarves, elves, half-elves, this list of races. We need this list of classes. And these classes need to look like X, Y, or Z. The monk is a perfect example of this. The monk is peak top-down approach. They know that it needs to attack a lot of times. It needs to be good at unarmed attacks. It needs to have slow fall ability. It needs to have increased movement. All of these sort of like flavor ideas, these are the things that when you imagine a monk, you imagine them doing. And so it is done by checklist. We need to make sure it has, X, Y, Z features, arrange them in order. And then after you have those already set, then you start to figure out, like, okay, what does that look like mechanically? Now that we know what the monk does, we need to figure out how it does it and what that's going to look like at the table. The opposite approach, bottom up, is you start with the mechanics. You start with a foundation of gameplay systems, and once you have those established and you make sure that those are working and that they're going to meet your design needs, then you take the flavor and the style and add that on. Now, neither of these is right design. Neither of these is wrong design inherently. There's lots of games that are designed in either style that can come out great. The problem is that when 5th edition is doing its top-down design, they kind of stop at a certain point. They never go to make sure that the mechanics are actually functional or engaging or evocative in any way. And importantly, and here's the crux of the video today, they don't make sure that the mechanics produce the gameplay experience that the fantasy of the game advertises. Let me tell you what I mean. In case you're worried, don't worry. I'm gonna tell you what I mean. The fantasy of D&D is a party of adventurers, maybe a party of heroes, going out and having adventures, encountering monsters, slaying the monsters. And yes, these are things that 5e does. But the fantasy of an individual character is often one of some kind of like fantasy badass, right? So like the barbarian is going to rage and it's going to do massive damage, and it's just going to be this like terror whirlwind on the battlefield that is, hacking and slashing everything apart, and like it gets hit, doesn't care, I'm just going to go through it. Incredibly tough, incredibly dangerous, incredibly powerful. In practice, the barbarian gets very few rages per day. So if you actually follow Wizards of the Coast guidelines on how many encounters to have per day, the barbarian is raging for less than half of them. The rest of the time, they functionally have no class features. Even while raging, you basically have to choose between offense and defense, whether or not to use reckless attack, which gives you advantage on your attacks, but also gives advantage on all attacks against you. The difference in hit rate will certainly increase your damage per round, but it also greatly increases the amount of damage that you take. Now, you do have resistance to physical damage, maybe more if you go bear totem barbarian. But that's not enough. It's not enough. You are still, because you are locked into melee, which is the most dangerous place to be, you are still taking more damage than anyone else in the party is going to be if they're standing back and staying at range. Or even if they are a melee character, or if they get caught in melee, if they focus on having a high AC, they're still going to be taking way less damage than you are. And the Barbarian only actually has like 1 more hit point per level compared to the Fighter, 2 more hit points per level compared to the Monk, 3 more compared to the Wizard. That's not much. That's not a huge difference. So what ends up happening is you have the advertised fantasy, and then you have the gameplay experience that does not live up to that fantasy. And to an extent, there is the onus is on the player. Typically, the onus is on the player to translate the game mechanics for their character into the fantasy that they wish to enact. A great example of this is the 4th edition Warlord. I love the Warlord, favorite class. It's my baby. The Warlord powers are highly abstracted. They have very specific mechanics, but how those translate into the narrative fiction, very, very abstract. And so one of the things that I enjoy doing at the table is imagining and then describing how it is that my character is accomplishing these things that the game mechanics say that I can do. It's great. One of the things I actually do in 5th edition is that if my character takes the disengage action, where for the rest of the turn I don't provoke opportunity attacks, instead of it being just like a careful retreat, which is like it's probably what they had in mind, but it's kind of boring. What I do is I actually do like an offensive disengage, where like I push forward, do a feint and attack, and then retreat as they are going to defend. You know, if I do like a kick at the enemy's shield, you know, they're staggered for a moment. That gives me the opportunity to get away. That's the kind of disengaging that I do. So I do appreciate the ability to translate game mechanics into the narrative fiction. And that is always going to be necessary because the game is not purely narrative. It's also not purely mechanical. You're always going to have to do that. But the problem is that when part of a class identity is being good at something, and then mechanically you are not good at it, that's a problem. It becomes difficult, or nigh impossible, to translate mechanically why your character is not living up to the fantasy that it was advertised as having. So this is a problem. This is a big problem. And what it really comes down to is that the designers of 5th edition did not value the gameplay experience. They only valued the advertised fantasy, which they did very good at. One thing I will say, 5th edition has great art in its books. It has decent... I don't want to say decent writing, because the 2014 books actually had a lot of like problems with regards to how the rules are written. But when it comes to descriptive writing, I can't complain. It's good. So the idea of the characters is solid. The problem is translating into mechanics. And this is, I think, why... It's actually 2 things. It's why 5th edition has survived so well up to this point. And now with the release of the 1D&D playtest, the paint is starting to crack and people are starting to realize that the game is not doing what it says it does. Because they wrote it so well, they advertised it so well, they marketed it so well. But it's also why I have an especially big problem with it. Because I'm very much focused on the advertised fantasy. I want to play the heroic character, the character that just strides into battle, is a total badass. You know, like I don't win every fight, but like I'm gonna go in like a confident baller because I know that I am a big damn hero. And you just can't do that with most characters in 5th edition. It doesn't work out. Talking a big game, acting a big game, and then falling flat on your face, like that takes all the wind out of your sails. That will severely hurt your self-esteem. So that's the thing, isn't it? Is that the disconnect? There's the Marshall Caster disparity. Sure, that definitely exists. But there's also the disparity between the advertised fantasy and the way that things play out at the table. And that is really, that is bitingly annoying. When I'm playing a character and it doesn't do what the book says it should do. The fighter is supposed to be the best at fighting, whatever that means for you. You know what that means for them? It means you get to attack more often. They literally said, you get to do this basic thing that literally anyone can do, and you get to do it one more time a turn at 5th level. And then at, I think it's 11th level, you get to do it one more time. And at 17th, you get to do it one more time. It's not engaging, it's not interesting, and it's not powerful. Wizards are literally better fighters than the fighter because they have spells that do weapon stuff that's actually effective and is more powerful than anything the fighter can put out. That's weird. And it betrays the fact that the developers at Wizards of the Coast had no intentionality with their design. They don't build game mechanics for a purpose, for a game purpose. They're building game mechanics for a flavor purpose. Sure, attacking more often has a certain flavor. You are literally better at fighting, technically. You have checked the little checkbox that says, oh, I am better at fighting now because I can attack twice instead of once. But is that good game design? It harkens back to a discussion I had recently about homebrew rules. When you are designing a rule set for a game, this person was designing a sanity system. And they kept using the phrase I designed the system to do this. And I and a few others were arguing that it doesn't do that. And it really made me think that there's a lot of parts of D&D that are written in such a way that, we assume this happens, and so we have designed the game accordingly. But did they? Because I can say, I have designed a new rule. Here's my rule, my special custom rule for my campaigns. All fire damage is tracked separately from regular damage. It reduces your hit points as normal, but it does not heal normally. The only way to heal fire damage is that during a long rest, you heal 1 point of damage that was dealt by fire. Why would I do this rule? Well, it makes fire more dangerous, sure. So what I build this rule for is to say, watch out for anything that deals fire. You got that big red dragon. It's very dangerous. It's going to keep the players on their toes. It's going to instill a sense of fear in them. And it's going to ramp up the tension because there's fire. It's very dangerous. Maybe we aren't so confident. Sure. Maybe. But you know what's more likely to happen? The party is probably just going to straight up avoid anything that they think might deal fire. If they take some fire damage accidentally, say from a trap or from an ambush or a fight they couldn't avoid, then if they take too much, they're probably just going to leave. They're going to stop the adventure and say, we're going back home to rest up for a month while we recover from these wounds. So the adventure stops. And I have accomplished the opposite of what I intended. So just because a developer or a system says, these rules are designed to do this, or these rules are designed with this in mind in order to create this kind of environment, doesn't mean that it actually does. And that's why I think people should take a closer look at game mechanics, especially those which claim to do a specific thing, to create a specific experience, and see, does it actually do that? In 5th edition, mostly they don't. that's kind of like why the squishy wizard myth exists. People think of the wizard as squishy because they have a lower hit die than most other classes. Okay, that is true. They also have, I think, the worst, like tied with the monk, the worst armor proficiencies in the system. Sure, those are true things. But is the wizard really squishy? It is trivially simple for them to get armor proficiencies. It is not only easy, it is actually mechanically encouraged for the wizard to invest in the constitution score so that they can succeed on concentration checks. So that constitution score is going to really offset their lack of hit points. Like I said, they only have 3 fewer hit points on average per level than the barbarian. It's not a lot. And then also they have a remarkable suite of defensive spells. They have the best defenses in the game, actually. So the wizard is the hardest class to hurt. So the squishy wizard is a myth. But the mechanics point out and say, well, the wizard is really fragile and needs to be protected. No, actually, the wizard is the one who should be doing the protecting. There's a problem in 5th edition where the mechanics are not designed with intention. There's no thought given to what the effect on the gameplay experience will be when they have introduced mechanics. During development, these mechanics, as they were creating them and refining them for whatever amount of refining they actually did. And the result is that the game's kind of all over the place. It's extra silly. That's why there's no tanking mechanics, because the ability to defend your allies with game mechanics is it only exists as a bottom-up design. You can't top-down design the tank. So this isn't like, I didn't want this to be entirely about 5th edition. I wanted it to be about game mechanics in general. When you are making homebrew, when you are examining existing rule sets, always doubt when the developer says that the rule will do X. And think for yourself what the actual incentives are for players who are interfacing with that rule, and see if it actually will produce X, or maybe it's going to do something entirely different. A lot of the time when I see developers say, oh, this is going to accomplish X, Y, or Z things, the rule that they're talking about is going to do the opposite. Especially if it comes to punishing players, because players hate being punished by mechanics. They have a strong tendency to just sort of like withdraw and stop interfacing with that mechanic, or to double down on whatever it is they were already doing that you're trying to discourage. Those are the most common responses to any sort of mechanic that stops a player from doing exactly what they want to do.